Welcome to Yodfat, a hidden gem in the center of the Lower Galilee. Why is this place a hidden gem? Because it tells an amazing story, and yet very few travelers make it to the site. I'm going to be honest, it's hard to get up the hill, and it's a long walk around. But if we're to follow the story of Yodfat, what we're going to find actually in this place is going to bring so much light to the story that we know. So how do we know about the story of Yodfat? From our very famous historian friend, Josephus Flavius, Joseph the son of Matthias, who wrote all of the details in his book, The Jewish War, about the Great Jewish Revolt in the years 66 until 73. The first battle that the Jewish people actually fought against the Romans was right here in Yodfat, and the commander, the Jewish commander of that battle, was actually Josephus himself. So I guess in his own enthusiasm as being a new historian, he really wrote a lot of details. And also, this is one of the places that we know that Josephus was actually present. So most of what he's going to write to us about this battle, we know that he witnessed because he was here. Scan the picture here. It's very nice.
All right.
Okay. The reason I want you to have this is show the layout of this village. Okay, so it's a village. The village of Yodfat is built on the top of a hill that's longer in the southern part. Okay, and we're at the top of the northern part now. So in theory, when we take a hike around this site, we could take a shorter path that sort of comes up the back and goes around here. But I think today we are going to have energy, me and you, to do a little bit of a longer one. We'll see.
Let's do it.
We'll see. Let's do it. Okay. There's so much Josephus to read here. They even have him over here. So, Josephus supplies a great deal of information about this battle. We know that a small militia of Jewish men were fighting against 3 legions and their auxiliaries that belonged to the Roman army right here in Yodfat. We know that the most accessible and approachable side to this hilltop town was from the north, right here. So therefore we know that the Roman army was stationed right over here. And in order to overtake this town, they went through several steps. One step was a softening, sort of an aerial attack that was accomplished using 2 main machines of war, the catapult and the ballista thrower. So the stones we're looking at that look like cannonballs, these are obviously not originals, although several originals were found inside the site, could be launched using a machine just like this, called a ballista machine, which would shoot in an arc and fall down inside. The other kind of machine that was used was a catapult machine, which was shooting, they're not exactly arrows, I would say more like a javelin, something like arrow shaped, but more massive. And these were 2 important tools or machines that the Romans were using in war. In order to get, though, all the way up to the town, what they would do was build a ramp. And they would push their machines up the ramp, including a siege breaker. And later on, we're going to see what that actually looked like. So when archaeologists came back 2,000 years later to unearth this actual site, they found a great deal of evidence from this battle, which supports everything that Josephus writes to us.
After over a century of Roman occupation and suppression, the Great Jewish Revolt against the Romans began. Approximately 40,000 people were killed in Yodfat by the Roman legions under General Vespasian. Yodfat was the first Jewish city in the Galilee to resist and fall, following the peaceful surrender of Sepphoris, Tzipori in Hebrew. After Yodfat's fall, other cities in the Galilee met the same fate at the hands of the Roman legions. The entire land of Israel fell after 7 years of bloody wars, culminating in the year 73 CE with the fall of Masada, the last stronghold located in the Judean Mountains.
So right now we are standing in the section of the northern wall, which are some of the fortifications that Josephus himself built. So Josephus, a young man, somewhat educated, not very familiar with war, is sent to the Galilee as the governor of the Galilee. His first task is to fortify 19 towns, which he lists some of them for us, including Yodfat. So actually the walls itself, the walls themselves are, some of them are different from each other. Some of them are casemate walls, which means that they're built with rooms, as opposed to other walls, which are just thick walls. And in fact, we even see places in this village where the line that was chosen for the wall was in the middle of the village. It might have cut people off from their places of work, neighbors from each other, or even gone right through certain buildings. The important part was to make the wall strong and defensive. And that is what Josephus's task was. And it seems to us today like he was pretty accomplished in that task. If you look over here, you can actually see that the national parks put us some shields to show us what the Roman warriors would have looked like. So we have here just a few soldiers in number. Again, the entire force around here would have been about 60,000. So that is a huge force being run by Vespasian, a seasoned commander. And Josephus describes to us various techniques that were used in order to wage this battle. So first of all, the Romans spent time catapulting their javelins in and throwing in their ballista stones and building up this ramp so that they could get the battering ram up to the top of the hill. And the Jewish people had to find various ways of keeping them out, and they basically stopped at nothing. One devious way that they were able to keep away Roman soldiers was by waiting for them to come closer and pouring boiling oil right onto their armor. So if you can imagine that they would be here in armor that's partially metal, what happens if you pour boiling oil on it that the soldiers couldn't get out of? In addition, Josephus tells us that the ramp itself became very slippery and that they were slipping and sliding into each other. Another wonderful story of bravery is one Jewish defender, when he saw the battering ram come up, or the battering ram approach the city, he took a stone and actually broke off the head of the ram, went down to bring it up. Again, all part of a little bit of psychological warfare. And he brought that piece up here, and then he was basically killed by the Romans. Josephus tells us that the city itself was besieged for 47 days until the Romans were actually able to overcome it. So, interestingly enough, one of the rooms here is full of stones. So you find the ballista stones and regular stones together, meaning that you basically see that it was built while the battle was going on. So that is basically the way that they were using the way that the defenders were trying to reinforce themselves. Now, the Romans basically understood that on the one hand, the Jews here had several months to prepare for this siege, right? As we said, the war happened in several different steps. First, the local governor tried to put down the revolt. He wasn't successful. They brought in the governor from Syria. When that wasn't successful, they wrote back to actually bring legions from Rome. We have months of time passing where the Jews realized, they understood very well what kind of force was going to be sent towards them. So part of their preparation, again, was to build fortification, but also to prepare themselves with food and water. Here in Yodfat, there's no natural source of water on the inside. And so the only choice for water was to get it from cisterns. So the Romans understood the longer that they fight from the outside, the longer that they wait on the outside, the people on the inside are basically eventually going to run out of supplies. And that will really be the best way to take them, is to wait for them to be tired and weak and just waltz in and take over the town. When the sources of water were becoming low, what Josephus had to do was instill a system of rationing for water. So the Romans on the outside understood that water in the town was being rationed. And the first thing they did to aggravate the situation was actually attack during the lineup for the water rationing, which obviously was very disheartening for the people inside who were already starting to feel thirsty and were concerned about running out of water. Josephus understood the psychological aspect of this. And what he instructed the people to do was to take their clothing, dunk their clothes in water, and then hang it up on the town walls. Okay, so they're hanging out their laundry at the town walls. Basically, they're showing the Romans that there was plenty of water to go around. In fact, they had enough water to do their laundry. Why? Well, probably they thought if the Romans thought that the defenders have enough water, the Romans are not going to want to wait for them to come out because they're starving or dying of thirst, but rather the Romans are going to come in and attempt to take the town. And that is what the defenders preferred. They preferred to meet the Romans head on than to die of thirst and starvation during a siege. The models here are scaled. So it would have been, it's 1 to 5, so it would have been 5 times bigger than what you see. And they tried to be pretty authentic. So a battering ram did in fact have the head of a ram. And the way you make it work is basically by swinging on it, which means you have men pulling it back and pushing it forward. So the mechanism here gives it extra force. And basically it was known that there was no way no walls could hold out against a battering ram. We see that another one of Josephus' devious tricks was to fill sacks with husks from wheat, and they put those sacks along the walls so that when the Romans used the battering ram, it would hit something soft and basically not have impact. Okay, so the Romans came and they slashed them open, and they went back to battering the walls until they made some progress. Okay. As mentioned before, the city of Yodfat's its water source was only through cisterns. And basically we see 3 different types of cisterns. The first kind is the most ancient. It's basically a bell with a spiral staircase, so you have to walk all the way down to get water and then drag your water all the way up. A second type developed after second type developed after the first type. There's a few stairs. You could sort of go down into it, scoop up your water, and then come back up. And the last kind was a real bell-shaped cistern. It could even be almost underneath a house. Oh, sorry. You just have to throw your bucket in and pull the water up. Okay, so right over here we have an example of a water cistern. You can actually hear a wonderful echo because underneath us is a big open cavern that was dug artificially. So every town needs a source of water. And in Yodfat, the sources of water are very limited. So the way to have water was by a cistern. You'll remember that here in Israel, rain is only between the festivals of Sukkot until Pesach, which is basically the winter months from October, November until April, more or less. So that was your opportunity to collect water, and after that, water had to be used carefully in order not to use up all of that resource before the fall rains came again. The Battle of Yodfat occurs in the summertime. So it is, on the one hand, very hot And to aggravate matters a little bit more, there's also no fresh source of water. We know that the town itself filled with some refugees from other places, so there's probably also more of a population using the resources than any normal summer. And that would be, again, the summer of 67. The difference between a cistern, I want to point out, and a well is that with a well, you dig down to the source of the underground water table. And that means that your supply of water is constant. There'll always be more. Cistern, whatever comes in, that's the maximum you could take back out. So once it's dry, you have no way of getting more water. As you can see from here, we have a wonderful view of the deep ravine that is located to the west of the town. So these deep ravines are located on the west, on the south, and on the east. Basically, there's almost no way to get in as long as anybody is defending the side of the hill. So it shows you that there's a little bit of defensive wall here. Let me point it out. Yeah. So you have a little bit of the western wall, the defensive wall of Yodfat. So this building, well, first of all, as we walk along the slopes, try to imagine that everything here was covered with homes, which are not here anymore. The Romans destroyed a great deal of them, and then they disappear with time. The building here was very, very simple. All the building of the homes here was field stones covered with mud. So we said in preparation for this oncoming war, the town itself built a wall. Maybe they hoarded food, but some of the residents were still concerned that that wasn't going to be enough, and they also built for themselves subterranean hiding spaces. And this is one of those examples. If you look over here, you can see that they were able to sneak down under their house and hit either one room that's on an upper level or two rooms which were further down. And they used it also to store for themselves food and water. And they also found a hoard of coins here. I think that the latest coins that were found here were from the year 64. So something that we have here really interesting in Yodfat, and this is going back to scenes of day-to-day life, is this little stone structure that I think if I had to ask people who had no background would say, well, what does it look like? It looks like a well, a little bit, but actually this is a bit of a pottery kiln. In Yodfat, 4 pottery kilns were discovered, which is a very large amount, showing that there was locally produced pottery. So I'm holding pieces what might have been locally produced pottery, but I'm showing you the rim of what might have been a small jug or a juglet. Archaeologists are able to identify pottery according to the rims. And the pottery that was found in this site is from one of 3 periods. It's either from the beginning of the settlement of Yodfat, which was before it became Jewish, or later on, so that would be referred to as Hellenist pottery, or later on from the Hasmonean period. When we talk about the Hasmonean period, we're talking about a short period that starts in the 2nd century and ends 100 years later. And this is a time when, once again, there is a Jewish government in Israel. So at the beginning, there's really just this Jewish enclave that is around Jerusalem. And that's what happens at the beginning of the Second Temple period. When the Hasmoneans become kings and they establish a dynasty, what they want to do is establish more territory, because they knew that Israel used to, well, contain Judea and a little bit of coastal plain and a north and a south. And they set out to begin conquering those lands. And the Hasmonean armies came here to the Galilee to reestablish a Jewish state here. And Yodfat, we know, is one of the places where that happens. So we see basically a change in character in the middle of the 2nd century BCE, when this town becomes Jewish. The kilns that we're seeing here are later, and they produced a lot of pottery, which is an interesting statement about the town. Why were they producing so much pottery? Looks like it must have been for commercial use. So we know that the residents of Yodfat were busy with 3 industries. So we just saw the first one, and we're going to have 2 more to check out. That's why I showed you before to film the pottery on the floor. Just the huge quantities of pottery isn't normal for the regular village streets. It is indication that there was some site of pottery being developed here. Oh, look, another beauty. Here, just want to show another beautiful rim. Okay, so the rims help us identify the pottery as 1st century pottery. We leave it all here. I'll take it. We have more bits of the reinforced wall. So we are now located in one of the residential areas of Yodfat. Again, most of the hill would have been covered with homes which are gone. They weren't maintained and they're gone. But we can see right over here is a mikveh. Again, the typical building, it has stairs leading down to a small pool that's 40 sela in size, that's a Talmudic size, and is covered with plaster on the outside. Lots of interesting things were found in the residential area, again, sort of opening up a keyhole or a window hole into the daily lives of the people who lived here in Yodfat. So we know that they were producing pottery. We also know that they were producing textiles. How so? Examination of the bones found in this area, the animal bones found in this area, led researchers to understand that most of the animals grown here were sheep, which is unusual. In a typical small village like this, there would have been sheep and goats, but here was mostly sheep. And most of the sheep that they found, the bones indicated the animals were not young. They might have been even 5 years old. And that's an indication that they were not used for meat, but they were used for growing wool. And something else really very unique and very special that was found here are weights from looms. Looms were used in the ancient world, and in the modern world as well, for producing textiles. In order to weave that wool into a textile, we have several processes that we have to go through. The first step is turning the wool into thread or into yarn, and that is done with on a spindle. The process was kind of like, you could do it like this with your hands, or you could be a little bit more sophisticated and have a hand tool. And one of the remains from a tool like that, which would be partially made of wood, is called a spindle whorl. And those could either be made out of stone or out of pottery. Many were found here in Yodfat. And then that yarn would have been taken and woven into fabric, into wool fabric. And over 250 of those loom weights were found here. So we already know that the people of Yodfat were living off of trade in wool and in pottery. I guess it kind of makes sense when we look at this area and we said the village itself is quite remote. It's steep on all sides. It doesn't actually have a wide valley full of fertile soil. So it could be that the people here were growing less crops and less produce, and their trade and their industry was based on other things. Another thing that we know, and we're going to see afterwards, that of course, like any good Galilean village, they were growing olives for olive oil. Olives don't need nice flat lands. Olive can grow also in very, very rocky soil. And in fact, there is a theory that the houses that have mikvaot under them might actually be the house of someone who was producing olive oil. In the time that the temple stood in Jerusalem, the oil would have been produced in ritual purity, which means that the maker of the oil, or anybody who had anything to do, who would touch the oil, would first immerse themselves in a ritual bath, get themselves into a state of purity, and then go on to produce olive oil straight from the Galilee. Okay, we are going into a olive press that was producing olive oil in the first century CE. So I think when we're in the houses, in the residential quarter, you need to really use your imagination to sort of place the people there, place the homes there, place the mikvahs, place all these small finds, and imagine how those things are related. But here you can just imagine getting up in the morning, having some breakfast, immersing in your ritual bath, and coming here to work pretty close to home in a nice sheltered place, which could have been mostly cool most of the year. And here we can see the various pieces of the olive press. As you can see here in Yodfat, there was no reconstruction putting the pieces back together to give the viewer an idea of how they worked. So you'll just have to follow along with me. First of all, olives are harvested only in the olive harvest season, which traditionally here in the Holy Land occurs with the first rain. So that could be in November, more or less. And olives are harvested wherever they're grown, and they're brought usually by donkey to the olive press, wherever it might be. It's very common to keep the olive press in the village because olives are very hard and they're very hardy and they're easily transported from place to place. So you would bring the olives here, put them all in the first step of this process, which is a crushing device. There would be a wheel on a piece of wood that could be used to turn this crushing device. And that basically would crush the olives. So what I mean crush is basically mash them and crack them open a little bit. Then we would take those crushed olives, put them in a very, very soft basket, always made out of natural fibers. And then the next step of the process would be to actually squeeze out the oil from those baskets. So here we just have a few pieces of the second step. What we have here are weights. So it's kind of funny, a few minutes ago I talked about tiny weights that you would hold in your hands from a loom, and these are weights from an olive press. The way the weights work is that they're attached to a wooden beam. And there's a wooden beam that would be above them, and screws that would connect to the weights by rope. Okay, so you could lift up the log, put your basket of olives down a place where it could be crushed, and then we would tighten the screws to increase the amount of pressure on the log. So basically, these weights would pull the log down, and slowly, the oil would come out that way. If you would see this fresh pressed oil, it doesn't always look so attractive. It's often full of little bits of olive skin, maybe olive pits, leaves, what have you. And basically your next and final step in the process would be to separate your olive oil from your gunk. And that is very, very simple to do even in the ancient world. All you had to do is put it in a cool place for a little while, and the olive oil would naturally float to the top. And Galilean olive oil back then, as today, is supposed to be very prized, delicious, and pure olive oil. And that's what they were growing here. That was the third major industry here in Yodfat. Trying to imagine being here in the summer of 67, watching the Romans closing in their circle, understanding that we're out of food and we're out of water, and the people here did not let go of their hope for the most part, although we just saw a hiding space, a crawling space that a family made for themselves, understanding that eventually it was very likely that the Romans were going to get through. And we just learned about the fact that Josephus himself, as part of his strategy, was try to attract the Romans, to cause them to actually attack the city so that they could, whatever it was, get it over with, either fight back or whatever was going to happen. A very small find was found here that really sheds light on the mindset of some of the people who, on the one hand, on the outside, were being very, very strong and doing everything they could to repulse a bitter enemy. But archaeologists in the spot found a tiny flat stone that you can see. The drawing is right here on the plaque. And if you look on the right side, where we're going to start, is a picture or a drawing of a mausoleum. I know to the casual viewer, it might look more like a spaceship, but if you've ever been to places with first century mausoleums, right in Jerusalem, it could actually look like that. It's got 3 steps going up. It might have a pillar on each side and something pointy on the top. And obviously a mausoleum is a symbol of burial and therefore a symbol of death. And right on the other side, there is a picture of a crab. A crab, which is the symbol of the month of Tammuz, the Hebrew month of Tammuz, a month in the summer, which more or less corresponds to the month of July. So if we're looking at this stone etching as a window into the mindset of whoever was here, what's he trying to tell us? Or what was he telling himself? Something very depressing. It's clear from this that he thought that his demise was going to come in the month of July, which is why he made this etching for himself. And as the story comes to an end, it seems that he was mostly right. So I'm actually going to read to you now from the Jewish War. We're talking about 47 days of siege. We talked about various ways that the defenders were trying to hold off the attackers. The defenders still head out, bearing up under their sufferings longer than seemed possible. On the 47th day, the Roman platform overtopped the wall, and on that very day, a deserter who managed to sneak out of the city informed Vespasian how few men were left in the city and how weak they were, and assured him that, spent with the total lack of sleep and constant fighting, they could no longer withstand an assault and would fall to a ruse if one was attempted. In the last hour of the night, when they counted on some respite from their sufferings, and when the exhausted men are mostly overcome by morning sleep, the sentries, he said, used to drop off. So that was the best time for an assault. So there actually is a traitor who's going to go out and give Vespasian a hint how this should be done. He said the people in the village, in the town, are so exhausted. As long as you hit them right before dawn, they'll fall, because the sentries then are mostly sleeping. At the hour indicated, they moved forward noiselessly to the wall. First to climb up was Titus, accompanied by one of the tribunes and followed by a handful of men from the 15th Legion. Soon the citadel had been captured. The enemy was sweeping through the center of town, and it was broad daylight, and yet the vanquished defenders had no idea the town had fallen, for most of them were helpless with fatigue and fast asleep. If anyone did arouse himself, he could not see for a dense mist, which at the critical moment happened to envelop the town. At last, when the whole army had streamed in, they jumped up, only to discover that all was lost. They did not realize that the town had fallen till the massacre began. The Romans, remembering what the siege had cost them, showed neither mercy nor pity for anyone. They drove the people down the slope from the citadel and slaughtered them. Even those still capable of resistance were deprived of the difficult ground of any chance to defend themselves. Jostling each other in the narrow streets and slipping down the steep face, they were swamped by the wave of destruction sweeping down from the citadel. Maybe even Josephus's picked soldiers were driven to suicide, for they saw that they could not kill a single Roman. They made sure that at least they would not die at Roman's hand to collect the far edge of the town Many of them killed themselves. And actually what we found here in this town was evidence that not only were so many people were slaughtered, meaning that their skeletons showed signs of being hacked by swords or daggers, the Romans also did not allow the Jewish people to come back and bury their dead. Which means that when the archaeologists came to visit to excavate here in the 90s, almost every place that they excavated, they found human remains. Human remains that showed sign of this battle. And eventually what they did was they collected the various remains that they found, which again had been in secondary burial, and they had been in mass graves. Again, why were they in mass graves? Because by the time people came back to this town to look for their lost ancestors, brothers, mothers, fathers, sisters, children, most of those bodies had already been decomposed, had been eaten by wild animals, and whatever they found in various mass graves, they decided to bury all together. And the archaeologists at the time called in the rabbinate of the Israeli army in order to have a ceremonial reburial for the people who fell defending the Holy Land, defending their homes. And they buried them over here, which is why we see this memorial here, which includes Yitkadal v'Yitkadash Shmir Rabbah, and over there, this is an entrance to a burial area. This was done with great respect and ceremony. So I'm sure this is also from Josephus and describes the deaths. Going to finish up Josephus in the Jewish War. On that day, the Romans killed all who were in the open. On the next few days, they searched the hiding places, falling on all whom they found in the sewers and in the caves, and destroying them regardless of their age, except women and babes. 1,200 prisoners went into the cages, while the dead, including those killed in battles preceding the capture, were reckoned at 40,000. Vespasian ordered the city to be demolished and set fire to all the guard posts. Such was the end of Yodfat, captured on the 1st of July in the 13th year of Nero's reign. And you will notice that the one person we did not mention was the governor Josephus. What happened to him? He's not mentioned. He is not one of the 40,000 dead. He lives to tell this story. How did he do it? We're going to find out. So our last stop along the Yodfat Trail is an area that has been excavated more recently, but unfortunately there's almost nothing here that's left for visitors to see. It was very important for the archaeologists to preserve what they found in this particular house, and therefore they removed large pieces of it, and it's on display in the Hecht Museum of Archaeology in Haifa University. What they found here is the home of a very wealthy person. How do they know it's a wealthy person? First of all, the house was full of frescoes. Frescoes is painting on wet plaster that leaves a very vibrant color. Not only did they fresco the walls, but also the floor was completely frescoed. This is a sign of extreme wealth. And there were other places in Israel where we actually have frescoes just like the ones that were found here. But the places that we have them are in palaces, like in Herodian, in Masada, and probably in Jerusalem. So whoever was living in this area was able to afford the same sort of decoration in his home that King Herod was able to afford for himself in his various headquarters. Which kind of might be surprising to us, because we often assume that at this time in the 1st century, the Galilee is full of middle class or lower class people, simple peasants and villagers. But right here, we have material evidence that there were people who were also from a higher socioeconomic level who lived in a small village, even like this one right here in Yodfat. Something else that they found here is one of the skeletons I mentioned earlier that was buried in the mass grave was taken out of this very wealthy house where he was found near arrowheads. So he might have lived a wealthier lifestyle than his poorer neighbors, but they all met the same end at the hands of the Romans. So where was Josephus? Josephus the governor. Josephus, whom we might have expected to be at the front of his men, at the front of defenders. But Josephus felt that he had a mission and he wanted to get out alive. Why? He felt that it was his responsibility to go on and lead the Galileans in the revolt against the Romans. So he tried to think of a way that he could somehow take himself out of the situation so he could continue doing works on behalf of the Jewish people and the defenders of the Galilee. He found some places to hide inside caves. As we've seen, this entire hill is full of underground caverns that you might not notice until you're actually upon them. The Romans themselves needed to search every nook, cranny, and crevice looking for more people hiding in caves. We're lucky again that Josephus left us an account so we know exactly what was going on. And he claims that he hid in a cave that was full of other people who wanted to commit suicide. But as he writes to us, he was absolutely determined that that should not happen. He said, "It is not your right to commit suicide as opposed to falling by the hands of the Romans." This caused his fellow refugees to be very angry. And according to what Josephus writes, they instead attacked him. And he used all kinds of persuasive powers to protect himself and to maintain his own life in order that they shouldn't harm him. And he felt as if somehow he evaded death, both from the Romans and from the fellow refugees who were hiding in a cave with him. And then he goes back to being the crafty Josephus that we've seen a few times. And I'm quoting from him. In this predicament, his resourcefulness did not fail him. Putting his trust in divine protection, he asked his life on one last throw. And he said to the people, "You have chosen to die. Well then, let's draw lots and kill each other in turn. Whoever draws the first lot shall be dispatched by number 2, and so on down the whole line as luck decides. In this way, no one will die by his own hand. It would be unfair when the rest were gone if one man changed his mind and saved his life." The audience swallowed the bait, and getting his way, Josephus drew lots with the rest. Without hesitation, each man in turn offered his throat for the next man to cut, in the belief that a moment later his commander would die too. Life was sweet, but not so sweet as death if Josephus died with them. But Josephus, shall we put it down to divine providence or just to luck, was left with one other man. He did not relish the thought either of being condemned by the lot, or, if he was left to last, of staining his hand with the blood of a fellow Jew. So he used persuasions, they made a pact, and they both remained alive. And at this point, Josephus himself will surrender to the Romans, who were wise enough to send an old friend of Josephus, a man by the name of Nicanor, to come and take him out. And they persuaded him that the Romans would not harm Josephus because they were fascinated by him, by this leader of the Galilee. And that is how Josephus comes to be taken in by Vespasian, adopting his last name, Flavius, and ends up going back to Rome and accompanying the Roman army on this journey. And this is how he chronicles the rest of the war for future readers. Again, Josephus was convinced, and in fact, Titus, who accompanied Vespasian, convinced Josephus that the Romans were fascinated by him and that Nero, the emperor, the Caesar just wanted to meet him. And this is what Josephus says, his last words to Vespasian as he is surrendering. You suppose, sir, that in capturing me, you have merely secured a prisoner, but I come as a messenger of the greatness that awaits you. Had I not been sent by God himself, I knew the Jewish law and how a general ought to die. Are you sending me to Nero? How so? Will Nero and those who succeed him before your turn comes remain on the throne? You, Vespasian, are Caesar and emperor, you and your son here. So lead me with your heaviest chains and keep me for yourself, for you are master not only of me, Caesar, but of land and sea and all the human race. And I ask to be kept in closer confinement as my penalty if I am taking the name of God in vain. So here we see Josephus' last words of wisdom. He is giving a prophecy to Vespasian that he himself will soon be Caesar. And as it should turn out, Josephus is correct.